Good morning, everyone. We are in Yeshayahu Perek Bet. And what I want to do is start a little bit differently than we have. And other times, we'll probably be doing this a bunch of times. Because since Yeshayahu is not a narrative, but more a poetic form of writing, therefore, sometimes you need to see the structure of the Perek to be able to understand a little bit more of what's going on and to appreciate some of the things. I'll point them out as we're going along, but at the very same time, I prepared this sheet. And not everything on the sheet necessarily do the colors make 100% sense, but I just wanted to highlight some certain things. So this sheet has the entire perek on it, all 22 psukim of this perek. And if you look at it, what you'll notice a few things up front. First of all, in terms of this perek, let me just pull it up on one page. The opening line is literally just an opening line. This is an introductory line that's going to say, this is what he said. Okay. Secondly, there is a closing line to the perek, which is pasuk chaf bet. In between the open and close is going to be the subject of what's happening. This perek itself is fascinating in the sense that there are two parts to it, and there are two different ways to read the two parts. From pasuk bet until pasuk daled, those three psukim that I have in the color, I believe, is red. Those three psukim are this exalted prophecy of what's going to happen b'acharit hayamim, at the end of the days. And we'll talk about the end of the days in a moment. But those three psukim are setting out, according to some, this idyllic proposition of what can be before we start talking about why it isn't. So look at what your goal can be, and that's the way it starts out. Pasuk Hey, which I have separated in a bit, which is Beit Yaakov L'chuv and Elcha B'or Hashem. Pasuk Hey probably belongs to the next part of the prophecy, next part of the perek, which we'll deal with, but in some ways it's different than the next part. And we'll see, because it's possible that it's also a concluding phrase to the previous section, to the section in red. Now, the next section from Hey to Tet, according to some Meforshim, are said by the Navi, and according to others are going to be said by the nations of the world. And that's why I have them in another color, in a different color entirely, because we're not sure who the narrator is in this. And we'll see how it plays out. And then I just want to go to Yud Aleph through Yud Zayin, the blue with the black in the middle. If you'll notice, there's a structure. In Pasuk Yud Aleph, it ends with the 5 words, V'nisgav Hashem levado bayomahu. It's in the Bar Ilan database, when you print out psukim, it never prints out the Yud, the Hey, the Vav, and the Hey. It always prints out a Yud, Kuf, Vav, Hey. So it's not a misprint. It was a conscious decision they made in the Bar Ilan database to avoid having people print God's name like that. And so if you notice, it ends, V'nisgav Hashem levado b'yomahu, and then 6 psukim later, we end again with it. And the reality is that what's probably happening here is, poetically, it's being framed. Those verses which are in black are being framed. And also, if you'll notice, those verses in black consist of 2 sets. You look at the bolding, what I bolded, 2 examples in each pasuk. So you have Kol Ge'av Aram, Kol Nisa V'Shafel, okay, Kol Arzei Halvanon Haramim V'Hanisaim, Kol Alonei B'Habashan. You'll see that there are in 2 sets of things in the middle. And then in the final section, okay, again, if we notice, we'll see that pasuk Yud, going back to the purple above, and pasuk Yud Tet, and pasuk Chaf Aleph all have similar actions. We'll get into it inside, which talk about the fact that people are going to hide. So first we have in Yud, hide in the rocks and the crevices of the rocks. Then in Yud Tet, hide in the caves of the rocks. And then again in Chaf Aleph, hiding again. Each time the people are hiding, they're afraid of what's going to happen. They're trying to avoid, trying to escape. And we see these comments being made after each of these significant pieces. And then finally, in Pasuk Chaf Bet, we have the concluding piece of the parak. So I just wanted to give you the big picture of it before we get into the details. And now we'll be able to get into the details. And so if you open up to parak Bet, Pasuk Aleph. And as I mentioned before on this very pretty colored page, it's amazing what you can do with a color printer nowadays. Once upon a time, this would have been a major action. Okay, it starts out the way many prophecies start out. Okay, and it just starts out, Hadavar asher chazai Yeshayahu ben Amoz. This is the thing, and according to the Dat Mikra, it probably should be Dvar Hashem asher chazai. It's a shortened form of saying these are the words of God, which Yeshayahu prophesied Al Yehuda v'Yerushalayim, regarding Yehuda v'Yerushalayim. Whoever's in the Tanakh, what page are we on in the big Tanakh? 956. 956. Okay. Now, why are we talking here about Yehuda and Yerushalayim? Because we'll see in a moment, we're going to be talking about an eschatological vision, the vision of Acharit Yamim. Why was it just Yehuda and Yerushalayim? And so the Radak says, because it's really following up in the previous parak where we have been talking about Yehuda and Yerushalayim, but it's also a generic kind of comment. This is not just, this is about the area which is going to be the key area of the Jewish people. Okay, even nowadays, when you talk about Israel, you'll have two different images. If you're talking about a modern Israel, often you'll think about Tel Aviv and those things. When you think about Israel, though, it goes back to Yehuda v'Yerushalayim, to that same kind of sense. And of course, when we're talking about the time of the end of the days, we're also talking about a time with the Beit HaMikdash. And so Yehuda v'Yerushalayim would be very natural to be Al Yehuda v'Yerushalayim, regarding Yehuda v'Yerushalayim, even though it's broader than just those two pieces.
Isn't there certain of you that were more towards?
Well, he's in the south.
That would be
100%. Yeshayahu's in the south, but as you'll see in a moment, the vision he's going to be portraying in these opening psukim, which we all know these visions are not exclusive to the southern kingdom. These are going to be visions that are world visions. And so Vayaba Acharit Hayamim, and it will be at the end of the days. Now, all of the classical Mefarshim say this is describing the times of the Mashiach. Interestingly, Acharit Hayamim doesn't have to mean in the time of the Mashiach. It could mean later, just later. And it could be the end of an era, and it doesn't have to be the end of the era of what we call the current existence. It could be an earlier period, but Ibn Ezra has a fascinating comment on it. He says, the reality is, if it isn't talking about Mashiach, what's going to be described is something that has never been experienced before. And if it's never been experienced before, he says that's why we're talking about Mashiach. I had a group of students here from a Christian school, from an evangelical school. They were visiting. I had to crown them first. They'd never been to a synagogue. So first I brought them to here to the shul. And I was talking to them about the symbols in a synagogue, and this lovely conversation we were having. And all of a sudden, we had 45 minutes. At minute 44, one of the kids raises her hand and said to me, so why don't you believe in Jesus? Okay, now, it was, I would have preferred that happening at minute 40, minute 30, not happening. But the reality is what I did was I said, well, because we have visions of what will happen. I actually referred to the second chapter of Isaiah. And I said, and those haven't happened. And so as a result of it not happening, we can't believe in what you believe, because we believe when Messiah comes, it's going to be the following. And believe it or not, it was fine. Okay, I got lucky. Okay, I had one of those moments of being inspired and not knowing it was coming. But if you look, Vayaba Acharit Hayamim, and this will be, and that's really Ibn Ezra's point, that if you want to say it's any earlier period, as he notes, he refers to, by the way, the history books. Sefer Ben Gurion refers to the books of Parasu Madai, the histories of Parasu Madai. He says, you never find an era where it's been quiet during the Second Temple. And so the Ibn Ezra says, this can't be talking about Second Temple. It has to be talking about much later, Yemot HaMashiach. Okay. Vayaba Acharit Hayamim, Nachon Yehar Beit Hashem Berosh Harim. The mountain of the house of God will be established among the highest of the mountains, Barosh Harim. In other words, that Har HaBayit, Mount Moriah, is going to be considered the greatest of all of the mountains. Okay, and Rav Schwab even goes further and he says it's going to be the greatest thing in the world, what's happening on the top of Harabait, on the mountain. V'nisa mikvot, it's going to be higher than other mountains. V'naharu elav, kol hagoyim. And all of the nations, in English literally, are going to stream to it. Now, the words v'naharu alav, you know, the shorish is the word nahar, a river. And it's an unusual word to describe movement, even though in English we do have streaming towards. I don't know how ArtScroll translates it.
No,
It uses stream? Yeah.
says flow.
Flow. Same thing. It's the same concept. In other words, it's the movement is a movement like a mountain. Or it's going to be, there's a fast move. Everyone is going to be coming. Now, it doesn't say Kol HaYehudim, it's Kol HaGoyim, notice. Okay, all of the non-Jews are going to be coming. And in fact, when you remember it, this is like they're going to run to this mountain. Now, that's what the Radak says. He uses the word Yarutsu. The Dat Mikra points out also that it could be a play on words Naharu. Naharu is an unusual verb. It's a gerund. We take a noun and make it into a verb. But the reality of this is that the word Nahar in Hebrew means river. The word Nahar in Semitic language, for example, in Aramaic, means light. And so it could also possibly be a play on the words that the Navi is using, that people are going towards the light. They're going to be, okay, that they're going towards the light itself, which is an interesting comment, to make an interesting observation. V'halchu amim rabim. And many nations are going to be coming, or great nations are going to be coming, Vamru. And they say, L'chu v'na'aleh el har Hashem el beit Elokei Yaakov. Let's go up to the mountain of God, to the house of the God of Yaakov. In other words, let's go to the Beit HaMikdash. All the nations of the world are going to want to go to the Beit HaMikdash. Now, interestingly, Julius Hirsch, Rav Shamshon Raphael Hirsch's son, in his commentary, Yeshayahu, points out that it doesn't say El Beit Elokei Yisrael, but specifically El Beit Elokei Yaakov. And he says, because the Jewish people at this time, when the rest of the nations of the world are going to say, let's go to the Beit HaMikdash, are not on the top of the world. This is the nation in exile. It's a nation dispersed. It's a nation that hasn't achieved its greatness yet. And so it still has that identity of Yaakov versus Yisrael. Yisrael is the princely Jewish people. Yaakov is the Jewish people who's always just trying to hold on to the heel, is always trying to catch up, is behind in that sense. Just as a total side note, by the way, I asked, many of us know members of the descendants of Shamshon Raphael Hirsch. We have in the shul, we have other members, and so the Bechhoffers. I asked David Bechhofer, who's a member of Kins North. I said, when I'm taking notes, I take my notes in Hebrew, and it's painful to write Julius Hirsch in Hebrew. I said, what was his Hebrew name? He said he didn't know. So he called up his grandmother, who is Rav Breuer's daughter, and she didn't know. And they finally looked it up. His name was Yehuda. But what I found fascinating is that, Rav Shamshon Raphael Hirsch, his real name was Shamshon. Raphael was his father's name. They used to use the father's name as a middle name. But Rav Shamshon Raphael Hirsch, one of his sons is Julius, and that's how they know him as Julius. The family just knew him as Julius and not as Yehuda. Made me feel good. But he says that this is Beit Elokei Yaakov specifically, and the is we want to go there. It's not just to the mountain. We want to go to the Beit HaMikdash. And when we go there, Vayorenu midrachav, Vayorenu from the Shorish, Yud Resh Hey, which is the same word, is to learn, to teach. Okay, we should be taught midrachav, from his ways. Now, interestingly, it isn't Vayorenu drachav. And on this, Rav Schwab points out, because very simply, Drachav are all of the ways of the Jewish people. Well, we don't ever expect non-Jews to accept everything we accept. We have the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach for the non-Jews. We have the 613 Mitzvot for the Jews. And so it's going to be Midrachav from some of his ways we're going to learn, but not just that, V'nelchab or Chotav, but let us walk in his ways. Now, or Chotav, or in his paths, might be another way of saying it. There, the non-Jews are saying, look, we want to do some and we want to do all. Well, what is the all? The all is the bigger pieces of the midot tovot, of the attributes of what Jews aspire to above and beyond just performance of mitzvot. Mitzvot are a means to an end. The means to the end, and this wasn't quoted by Rav Schwab, but Rav Hirsch used to use the term of a Yisrael mensch. Okay, that the ideal Jew was what he referred to as a Yisrael mensch, a person who was a Baal derech eretz, who had the sense of culture and was cultured and was a person of a higher moral standing. That they want to adopt. The Jews, in other words, they're not going to take on all of the mitzvot. It's going to be midrachav, but orchotav they want to have. Let's learn all of this. And now comes the famous word, the phrase we all know: Ki mitzion tetzei Torah udvar Hashem Yerushalayim. Because from Tzion will come the Torah, and the word of Hashem will come from Yerushalayim. Fascinating. If I look in this text, who says these words? The Goyim. The Ki Mitzion Tetzei Torah is a statement, and this is the Maharikra. Not everyone agrees. The Maharikra, this is a statement that was said by the non-Jews. We sing it all the time, but the non-Jews recognized it. That's the Maharikra. Now, the Radak says, actually, this is the Navi inserting himself in. Okay, the Navi says, the non-Jews are going to want to do all these things. Why are they going to want to do all these things? Because Ki Mitzion Tetzei Torah Udvar Hashem Yerushalayim. The Navi, Yeshayahu, says these words, but it looks like the simple pshat that it's the non-Jews. Yeah.
Means there's a monotheistic belief.
100%. If you remember, it's widespread. Well, listen, the reality is, if when people always say, well, what's going to be Mashiach? What's going to be Mashiach? We say it 3 times a year. 3 times a day we describe what's going to be in the time of the Mashiach. And no one ever pays attention to it, unfortunately. The second half of the Aleinu describes Mashiach. Okay. We're waiting for that day, right? When the idols are going to be removed, okay, and the whole world is going to be established based on a monarchy of God, and everybody's going to be recognizing your name. They're going to be calling out your name. In other words, in the time of Mashiach, what we believe, and this is the Rambam also says it in the last section of the Yad HaChazakah, Hilchot Melachim, we believe that in the time of Mashiach, the only difference to the natural world will be an acceptance of God. We don't believe that things are going to be immediately, maybe at a later point, we'll see that in a moment, but we don't believe, in fact, we won't see it here, we don't believe that things are going to be overturned miraculously. That's another phase which is referred to as Tchiyat HaMetim. But in the Yemot HaMashiach, the difference is going to be, there are going to be Jews, there are going to be non-Jews, just like we have nowadays. There will be nations with different identities, just like we have nowadays. There will be people who need to work, people who will be able to learn, people who will be able to do all sorts of things in this world, but everyone is going to accept the Malchut, the kingdom of God. Everyone's going to accept that there is one God. They're going to be monotheistic, and they're going to be removing the idols from among them. That's going to be the big shift that's going to be happening here. Now, again, if the non-Jews are saying the statement, by the way, Ki Mitzion Tetzei Torah, it doesn't mean Torah in our sense, because Yaronu, it's the teachings. Remember, Torah that we think about it's not that from Zion will come forth the 5 books of Moses. No, from Zion will come forth the teaching. And it's, the word Torah means so many different things and is used in so many different ways. When people refer to us as Torah Jews, they're not calling us Karaites who only believe in the 5 books of Moses. They're telling us that we are Jews who live a life that is guided by both the Torah Shebichtav and the Torah Sheba'al Peh. We're not called Torot Jews, but we're called Torah Jews. When someone says, I have a Torah class, it might be that they're learning Shulchan Aruch. We have this broad definition. In this context, if the non-Jews are speaking, it seems to be that what it means is the teachings, the very teachings that they wanted to earn and to learn from people on top of the Beit HaMikdash. Now, how are they learning on top of the Beit HaMikdash? It's very simple. It's not just experiential, but remember, in the Lishkat HaGazit, in the Beit HaMikdash, when you went through into the Ezrat Yisrael, there was the seat of the Sanhedrin. Okay, so the Sanhedrin was there. There were Nevi'im. There were the Kohanim who were the teachers. Remember, from Ezra and Nehemiah later on, we'll see that was more popularized, but the Kohanim were there, were the primary teachers. You had the great leadership, and so they're coming to be instructed. And this also will be helpful to understand some of the pieces we'll have a little bit later. Next piece. Yes, Barry.
Why do we distinguish between Zion and Jerusalem? I mean,
we really don't. We really don't. It's poetic format where you have parallelism. Sometimes you want to find the differences from those parallels. Poetically, there is this kind of repetition that you'll have in many psukim. So then we start saying, well, you have the word of God doesn't necessarily mean the prophecy of God, but the teachings of God as well. It's a poetic format. Okay. Yeah, Jim.
With culture, what do you mean by culture?
Higher culture. Not,
What is higher culture?
well, the way-
Music? Is it art?
yeah, according to Rav Shamshon Hirsch, it would be music, it would be art, it would be a person who is a refined human being, a person of language is used properly. It's a person that we would call the ultimate mensch. Okay, in English. And now, nowadays it's a complicated term. Nowadays, it's some of the criticism, for example, when we use the word culture nowadays, is because a person who we view as a cultured person is not a person who's immersed in modern culture. We're sometimes talking about 19th century and earlier culture. When there was a sense of refinement of language and there was this beauty of language and of behavior and all the rest of those things.
So I'm just trying to wrap my head around this time of time. So when you say that Sanhedrin, Nevi'im, Kohanim, they're going to be the teachers, but of course we don't have Nevi'im. And will there be Nevi'im? And the other thing is who then decides? Today we have the far right, the left, the this and that. I'm talking about in Frumkeit, in our teachings and etc. So how does this whole thing merge? How does it merge?
Right. So I think the answer is like this. Remember, we're talking about an era of Mashiach when there will be a Beit HaMikdash. Right. So there will be a hierarchy to the Jewish people. Okay. And so you will have people identified, whether or not there will be Nevi'im. We understand that the Melech HaMashiach does have. Okay. Yeah, Yafu.
Is there a distinction between Ki Mitzion to say Torah? So Torah comes from Zion. That's your teachers who are sitting in Sanhedrin, sitting in the Lishkat HaGazit. And then you have all these folks that religious response.
Yeah,
so the Baruch Hashem is
I think that I think there's room to say that. I haven't seen that, but I think there's a lot of room to say it. And I think, Shoshi, what we'll discover is there will always be a right, a left, and a center, and we will always believe wherever we are that we are in the center. The people on the right believe they're centrists. The people on the left believe they're centrists, and the people in the center believe they're centrists. It's the nature of human beings, okay? And so I have found it, and I know we're a bit off subject, but I think these psukim are very important. I have found it fascinating that I can go through a week and be accused of being Haredi and be accused of being a far left liberal, and not change any behaviors. Is just who's looking at the moment. So I don't get bothered by the right, the left, and the center descriptions. What I think what we're looking at is that what we're describing is an authentic message. Even within the times of the Nevi'im, even in the times of Sanhedrin, there were different perspectives. I don't know if you would say that this, well, you could use this perhaps, even Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai had different ways of relating to people. They both represented authenticity to the extent that we say, B'yamot HaMashiach, we're going to paskin like Beit Shammai, not like Beit Hillel. Okay, that there's going to be that shift, but they were both authentic. And I'm sure if you're looking at one side, you're going to say one is more extreme or one is more demanding or whatever the right description is of it. So the right, left, center doesn't matter. The authentic matters, and authenticity is actually going to be something that'll be much easier in the time of Mashiach, because there will be the religious and political hierarchy returning back to the Jewish people versus what is now a meritocracy that, who is a Gadol Ador, or how do you become a Gadol Ador, or what is a Gadol Ador? You know it when you see it, but there's no vote that takes place. I'll give you one last way off example of this. I was in Israel this past week, and I'm on the expanded executive of the World Zionist Organization. And there's a fascinating thing because there are Jews from every perspective, from Meretz and all the way over to Degel HaTorah, who were in these meetings. And the reality is that at one point there was a discussion that funding from the state of Israel in the World Zionist Organization goes directly to the Reform movement, goes directly to the conservative movement, and doesn't go directly to the Orthodox movement, but there's a department in the World Zionist Organization that services the Orthodox Jews. And the question someone asked is why? And the reality is because we don't have a movement. We have everybody. And we don't have a person who's at the top. We can't say this person or this organization or this council represents all of the Orthodox Jews. And so as a result, they had to figure out a way to make it work. And so they had to create some kind of body. But the others, you can just give them a check and here they have their stuff and what they need. Now, the reality of all of this is we're talking Messianic, we're talking the non-Jews recognizing it. And whether this pasuk of Ki Mitzion Tetzei Torah, this phrase of Ki Mitzion Tetzei Torah Dvar Hashem Yerushalayim, was said by the Navi, just explaining why the non-Jews came to Yerushalayim, or if it is a continuation of what they're saying, it's the reality that they're seeing. And then,
This is sort of a political question, but do you think in any way that now tens of thousands of Muslims are going to Har pray is in a way fulfilling exactly what we want, and we're not.
Not at all. Yeah, I would say not at all, because they're not going to the Beit Hashem. What this is describing is they're going to the Beit Elokei Yaakov. If Muslims are going up at the Har Bayit, it's not because it's Beit Elokei Yaakov. Okay. Then you have in Pasuk Daled, we're really zipping along today. V'shafat ben hagoyim, and v'shafat. It could be, according to the Radak, the Melech HaMashiach is going to judge among the nations. According to the Barbanel, it is the Sanhedrin as a body is going to judge. It could be God is going to judge via the Kohanim, the Nevi'im, and the Chachamim. V'ochiach la'amim. And he's going to clarify things. Now, hochiach can mean to rebuke, but hochiach can also be to clarify, as the Mitzudat Zion says, inyan birur dvarim. It's going to clarify matters. Rabim, hochiach lamim rabim. And now comes the next phrase you have. V'chitetu charvotam li'itim, and they will crush their swords into plowshares. Now, a plowshare, if you never knew what a plowshare was, it's the blade on the plow. Okay, so they're going to convert their swords into plowshares. Think of scissors, like shears. V'chanitotehem lemazmerot, and their spears are going to be made into pruning scissors. Lo yisagoy el goy cherev. People will not, one nation will not lift up a sword against another. V'lo yilmedu od milchama. And they will not teach anymore. And they will not teach any more war. Now, it's actually, Rav Schwab has a piece that's pretty accusatory regarding the United Nations. In his commentary, when he was teaching, he talks about that it's on the United Nations walls, and he says, you see how ineffective this United Nations has been. However, if you take it for a minute, let's look at it from the perspective of Pshat. Vishafat. Vishafat is in a singular word. A singular form, okay? It's not v'shaftu. And so as a result, the Meforshim had to figure out who is the singular. So the Radak takes the easy one. Remember, he says it's the Melech HaMashiach. He's going to be judging. The Ibn Ezra says, no, it's a singular body. It's the Sanhedrin, so you can use the singular. The Dat Mikra suggests v'shafat, because we've been talking about God, it's God via the vehicles, the people, who are representing God's position in this world. That's the symbol. Now, lo yisa goyel goy cherev, that piece, which everyone knows that phrase as well. Why? How does it flow between judging and no more war? And the reality of it is, the Radak says that since those things are going to be resolved, the disputes are going to be resolved, there's no place for war anymore. The Abarbanel, who was a politician, remember, he was the treasurer in the court of Ferdinand and Isabella. And remember, the Abarbanel hated governments because if you just imagine, he was exiled. He was from Spain and then from Portugal. Unfortunately, he led a miserable life at the late 1400s. The Abarbanel, who we call him Don Isaac Abarbanel. Okay, Don was his title. It wasn't that he was a mafioso. He was a major member of the court. He was the treasurer. Okay, there are theories that say that he funded Columbus's journey. Ultimately, we don't know, but it was the same time frame. So the Abarbanel says, listen, the reality is judging people doesn't necessarily bring it, but because people are all the nations of the world are going to accept God. Well, most wars in this world have been waged over religious issues. Ultimately, they go back to a religious issue. And if everyone has accepted God, we've removed that religious issue from the table, and as a result, there won't be any more wars. Now, the one thing I would say, the reason the Radak resonates more with my understanding is because, according to the Abarbanel, it makes perfect sense. But the opening of the pasuk talks about judging, and the other says about not waging war. Well, judging requires an acceptance of the judge. Okay, that God's in charge, so that's how you would flow into no more war, according to Barbanel, saying that wars happen because of religious dispute. But the Radak, who says it's judging in general, if you resolve all conflict, there's no reason for war. Okay, well, that to me is an easier flow, but I could be totally wrong, and the Barbanel would say that I am, and I couldn't argue with him. Now comes with Pasuk Hey. Now, Pasuk Hey is again, that Pasuk, if you recall on the sheet I passed out, we're really not sure what it belongs to. It would seem to be part of Hey through Tet. That's why I made them all the same color. And yet, it could be part of this opening magnificent vision of the future. And the reason why it could be is because Beit Yaakov lechu v'nelcha b'or Hashem. The house of Yaakov, let's go, and let's go in the light of God. Now, a couple of things before we get there. So it could be like the Navi's closed. The Navi said, look what the Goyim are doing. Now let's do it ourselves. Okay, that could fit. Now, from a perspective of the text, if you notice at the end of Pasuk Daled, and the one I printed, I don't know if it's in all of your Chumashim, there's a pei or a parashah ptucha. It's a new paragraph. So from the position of the Mesorah, Hey belongs to the next paragraph and not to the preceding paragraph. There are two kinds of paragraphs. We remember within Tanakh, there's what's called a Parsha Ptucha and a Parsha Sduma. The Pei or the Samach would indicate it. A Parsha Ptucha means the paragraph ends and the line is blank until the end of the line. A Parsha Sduma means the paragraph ends and within the space of about 10 yuds, in other words, if you wrote yud 10 times, you'll start a new paragraph on the same line. The difference between those two kinds of paragraphs are not just graphic. The differences are also a Parsha Ptucha typically will indicate what comes next is new. May have some minor connection, but it's new. Whereas a Parsha Sduma says what comes next is connected, because that's why it continues on the same line. Being a Parsha Ptucha would seem to suggest that Pasuk Hey is on its own. Pasuk Hey, and again, we're not sure who's speaking here, though. See, the way I translated very simply, like the Radak says, that the Navi is saying, okay, you see what they did? Now, Jews, you jump in, because if you remember, this was the Beit Elokei Yaakov, it was the house of the God of Yaakov. The Jews weren't at their greatest point in life yet. They were still a dispersed nation, an exiled nation. Not everything had happened yet. They weren't all buying into everything yet. Okay, that vision. Okay, so that also is talking about Acharit Yamim. The Radak says now, the Navi says is turning to the Jews who aren't in the time of Mashiach yet. Now, Jews, I gave you this ideal. I gave you what's going to be. Now, look, let's talk Tachlis. Okay. And that's where he's coming. Interestingly, Rashi follows the position of the Targum Yonatan, and he says, no, this is what the Goyim are saying. The non-Jews say to the Jews, okay, we get it. Come on, Jews. Time for you to come along. We see what's happening. We need you to jump into it. And they're saying, come with us. In essence, the non-Jews are encouraging the Jews to do tshuva. According to the Targum Yonatan, really, the Jews are recognizing itself. And according to, one more time, this is the Radak who says this is the Navi who's talking. It's the Navi saying, Jews, get your act together. You see what they're going to do? Now you get your act together. Yafa, you had a question? Oh, okay. Now, the fascinating thing is, again, if it's the non-Jews speaking, well, it would seem to be that this pasuk and possibly the following psukim are a continuation of that great vision. If it is the Navi speaking, that great vision was put out there by the Navi, and now he's coming back into reality of today. So just to move forward, Ki natashta amcha Beit Yisrael. Beit Yaakov, I'm sorry. Okay, natashta, and ultimately what we're saying, you, the house of Yaakov, have failed. Okay, you've gone away. Amcha Beit Yaakov. In fact, Rav Schwab goes so far as to actually say, you, a house of Yaakov, have failed in your nation's mission. This is like right hitting you really well. Rashi suggests, okay, and this is a second explanation of Rashi. Rashi offers two possibilities of the Navi being the one speaking versus the Goyim speaking. In his second piece, he says, you, very similar to Rav Schwab, he says, Azaftet Masat Tov Asher Al Yadoni Yetela'am. You have left, Natasha, you have left those good things which made you into a people. You don't have your identity as your unique identity as Jews, you have lost along the way. He continues and he says, Ki, now why? Mal'u mikedem. What you have done is you have filled yourself with kedem. Kedem is east. You filled yourself with the knowledge of the east. Who lived to the east of the Jews was Aram. Okay, we're the Arameans. And those were not the people we want to imitate. Arami Oved Avi, if you remember from the Haggadah. Okay, these are the people that we want to be away from. And so you've started adopting practices of the pagans. Va'onanim kaplishtim. And you've begun to take upon the various forms of witchcraft, of sorcery, of the plishtim. Now, geographically, it's fascinating, and I didn't really think about it till just now. We're dealing with both directions, right? East and west. You've turned both ways. Both ways you have looked outside the boundaries, outside the borders of Eretz Yisrael for your inspiration and for your religious connection. You've gone to the people on the east, you've gone to the people on the west. Uvi Yaldei Nochrim Yaspiku. And with the Yaldei Nochrim. Now, Yaldei, the more complicated explanation that fits a lot easier into the pasuk is the Radak and the Mitzudat Zion. The interesting, I assume in the Art Scroll it says with the children, right? How does Sansino translate it? The end of verse 7.
Brood of aliens.
The what? The brood of aliens. Okay. So the way the Mitzudat Zion explains this, it's referring to the way of thinking, the offshoot as opposed to offspring. Okay. That it's talking about the ideas of the foreigners, yaspiku, even though it's a sin, okay, that's like, it's enough for you. That's what you've gone for. So it's not children, It's their ideas. So if you look at it, you say from the East, you've started to fill your minds with it. From the West, you've started adopting the basest form of pagan worship. And with these ideas, those offshoots of these ideas, you've been satisfied. In other words, you haven't taken Torah. Rashi, however, says, no, this last phrase, we have to look at a more shot approach. You've intermarried. And you've been happy enough with your non-Jewish children. Been happy enough, and those are your future. It's a different kind of problem. If I take the Radak and the Mitzudat Zion, all of it is thought and ideas and ways of thinking. I have three different kinds of comments on it. So the pasuk seems to be a little bit of an easier flow. But if you take Rashi, obviously you have three different kinds of sins. Vatimale artso kesef v'zahav. And what you've done is you have filled your land with silver and gold. Ve'en ketzei lo otzrotav. And there's no end to how much you have amassed, how much are in your treasuries. Now, vatimale artso. So the problem here is this isn't third person. His land. Who is the artso? Now, it could be Kimalu also. We're still in third person. It could be the Navi is talking. It could be the non-Jews are giving us Musar. That, by the way, is the approach of Julius Hirsch. He says this whole piece is the non-Jews giving us Musar. Okay, with all of the silver and gold. The silver and gold also is a reason why some suggest that this specific nevuah comes at the earliest times of Yeshayahu as a Navi. It's during the time of Uziyahu. The king Uziyahu, if you remember, was a builder, and he had great wealth in his treasuries. And so it could be that this is the reason why this was an earlier prophecy, but he goes and he fills with silver and gold. Vatimale artso susim, and he goes out and he fills his land with horses. Ve'ein ketzei lemarkav tav, and there's no limit to the number of chariots. Why is horses significant?
Right. Okay.
Egypt, if you remember, the things that kings were not supposed to do, right? Lo yarbeh susim. They can't have a lot of horses because of Egypt. Egypt was, it was really about the time of Yetziat Mitzrayim. Koren just came out with another volume. They have 3 volumes out now on Tanakh with archaeological notes, okay, and anthropological notes on the Tanakh. And so on the new one on Shmot, which just came out, they have Shmot, they have Shmuel, and I forgot what the third one was on. On the one on Shmot, it talks about the fact that at this last week's Parsha, B'Shalach, where we talk about Susrach Bora Mavayam, that this was very early in the period of time when the Egyptians, Yetziat Mitzrayim was the beginning of the time when the Egyptians had horses and chariots. So we're now about 400 years later. Okay, but they were known for their horses, and we were told in the Torah not to go back to not for a king not to have too many horses, because that means he's going to have relations and alliances with Egypt. So we don't want to have it, and so it kind of finds its place in here, talking about the monarchy, how it's gotten out of control. Vatimale artso elilim, and then he went ahead and he filled his land with gods, with pagan gods. Now, why? Well, think about the process here. You go ahead and you learn from the East, you learn from the West, you learn from their thoughts. You have too much wealth, you have too many horses, you have all these relationships with everybody all around you. I think about the directions we've got. We have East, West, and South, and all of a sudden it's only natural, says the Radak, that you'll start worshiping idols. Ultimately, if you learn from them, they have to have a lot of money, then obviously you're going to have Avodah Zarah. The interesting point on this, by the way, is not just what's the problem with a lot of money. A lot of money also suggests that you don't have a lot of faith that things will be with God. I had a conversation with one of my balabatim. I won't tell you which of the organizations, and they were very concerned about something with budget, and we have to be very careful about the budget. And I said, no nonprofit ever was able to succeed if everything is driven by money. You have to be aware of where things are at, but you can't keep going ahead. You have to be fiscally cautious and conservative on everything because you won't be able to build things because you need to have a little bitachon and stuff. Doesn't always make people feel good, but you have to have a little bit of bitachon. The same kind of thing happens if you go ahead and you're amassing great wealth. What does that say about you? And what does it lead you to? So you have wealth, you have foreign ideas, you have foreign contacts, and then you start having these foreign gods. They start bowing down to the things their handiwork, to the things their fingers have made. Now it could be referring to the idols, but it could also be referring to the economics, that they're starting to worship their wealth. Yeah.
How do you justify Shlomo HaMelech?
By the way, we don't justify Shlomo HaMelech, and Shlomo HaMelech is criticized. We say lo yarbelo nashim, lo yarbelo susim. Well, okay, we say you don't have too many wives, don't have too many horses, don't have too much wealth, and we see that ultimately they led Shlomo HaMelech. We see this. This is the Chazal talk about this in the Gemara. That Shlomo HaMelech, they say nicely, but because of all of these things, there was avodah zarah taking place in Shlomo HaMelech's house. Okay, it's not good. It's not good, even, but we also say a person, if you get too wise, being too smart, you can outsmart yourself. Okay, and that's one of the things that's referred to sometimes out the chacham. Now we're coming towards the end of this paragraph, and we may be coming to the end of the shir pasuk tet. I didn't realize I was going to take so long on this. Vayishach Adam vayishpal ish va'al tisa lahem. What does it mean? You haven't. They start bowing down. How does the Art Scroll translate this? Anyone have Art Scroll? What? No, you're Sensino. How does Art Scroll translate? Because Art Scroll always goes by Rashi.
Humankind will have bowed and man will have humbled himself.
Okay. Va'al tisa lahem, and it continues. And what? And don't?
Yet you will not forgive them.
He will not forgive them.
You
You will not forgive them. Okay. Now, ultimately, this is a statement. Who's talking here? People bowing down and people demeaning themselves. Yashpila da'ish.
It's the Navi.
The Navi is talking. The Navi is talking. Okay. Interestingly, the Navi is saying, you didn't do enough. You're going to say, oh, I'm really bad. You didn't do enough. You're not going to be forgiven. According to Julius Hirsch on this piece, he says, no, you haven't done enough, okay, to make the nation, to inspire the nations of the world. Am Yisrael. It's criticizing the non-Jews are criticizing the Jews. They're saying, remember, it started out by talking about how all the non-Jews are going to be streaming to the Beit HaMikdash. Then they say, hey, Jews, come on, let's go. Come on, you too. Right? If we take this as all being the non-Jews speaking, Torah, Beit Yaakov, Lechu v'nelcha, let's all go, right? Okay, all of these things they're talking about it, and at the end of it, then they start saying, you Jews, you haven't been doing too good. You've been worshiping idols. You've been doing this. You've been doing that, and now they're saying a pasuk, and they're saying, you Jews, you haven't inspired us. You haven't fulfilled your role in this world.
So it's almost like contrasting the recognition of the goyim for the godliness and the grandness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu versus the rejection of Am Yisrael of its own great heritage.
And that is one way of looking at it. Remember, Rashi has two different approaches in this whole thing. Is the Navi talking or the non-Jews are talking? If we say the non-Jews are still talking here, they're criticizing the Jews. The Radak says, no, that's not the case. Okay, that the Radak says ultimately that what's going to happen is we are going to understand we did wrong. Okay, after people are going to try to fight with the Melech HaMashiach, ultimately they're going to bow down to the Melech HaMashiach. They're going to they yashpilo aleim. I'm trying to think of the right English words. They're going to subjugate themselves to the Melech HaMashiach. Ultimately, this could be, by the way, referring to even the non-Jews. Einei gavhut adam shaf. Oh, what I skipped? Oh, bo vatsur. What you're going to do right now is you're going to try to hide. V'hitamein be'afar, you're going to try to dig yourself down into the dirt. Mipnei pachad Hashem u'me'hadar gono, because of the fear of God and because of the glory of his strength. Now, Rav Schwab has a beautiful story, and I wrote it down. Rav Schwab writes, and I'm just going to read what he wrote, or what was written based on his shir. In my youth, I had the great zechiyah to visit the saintly Chofetz Chaim. This was in Tafresh Pei Tet. So 1929, he visited the Chofetz Chaim, Rav Schwab. At that time, I heard him envision life after the coming of Mashiach and realization of Tchiyat HaMetim. And this is what the Chofetz Chaim said that Rav Schwab heard. People will think that when Mashiach comes, everything will be fine and dandy. Now, obviously, the Chofetz Chaim didn't say fine and dandy. Life will be beautiful and easy. This is a misconception. Imagine Eliyahu Navi is present. Avram Avinu is walking through the streets. People will run away in terror. They'll crawl in cellars to hide to avoid seeing or being seen to these giants of humanity. This is the picture when Mashiach comes in the future. Okay, Be'ita, when the Jewish people are not ready. So what he's saying is when the Jewish people aren't ready, we're going to start hiding out of terror because we're going to realize how bad we were. Einei gavut adam shafel. Okay, the eyes of people are going to go down. They're going to look down. Shach rum anashim, and people are going to, the people of high are going to go down, are going to be brought down. V'niskav Hashem levado bayomahu. And on that day, the only thing that is going to be exalted is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And so what you see here, and we're going to stop here today, if you see here the beginning of this prophecy, beginning of the prophecy draws for you this magnificent picture of what's going to be in the end of the days, at the time of Mashiach. But it's not talking about Jews yet. It's talking about the non-Jewish world. And it's either there, that description of the non-Jewish world recognizing God, to tell the Jews, look what you have to do to become better, given where you are today, pre-Messianic era. Or it's in the Messianic era, and the non-Jews are going to be the ones who are going to give Musar to the Jews. Say, look what you're missing out on. You don't realize what you've lost or you don't have yet. And so which way it goes, we don't know for sure. Both ways can work. If you look on the sheet I gave, okay, ultimately we're right up here into the Viniskava Shem Levado. We're halfway through the parak, but in this first half of the parak, we have these beautiful words that we know so well. We're going to stop here.
There's also a third way because
Yeah.
has been talking to the people of his era,
He is. No, according to the Navi, if it's the Navi, he's talking to the people of Zerah.
and that they abandoned the preference and moved
Right.
away.
No, 100%. If it's the Navi is saying he's talking to the people now. If it's the non-Jews, they're talking to the people then. Yeah.
So isn't there also this idea of this low imagery and this high imagery? Because here is this to lift up, you will not lift them.
We will,
So
right.
That's contrasted with this, like they are lowly, they are humble.
We're going to find,
Up,
we're going to
down.
see all sorts of symbols of high and
Here
great,
also it
right.
continues
and then
here,
we're going to see low and high,
Yeah.
right? We're at a low and
right.
we have the potential of the high,
Ene Gavaot,
right?
Shafal.
All those words are going to come in. Yeah,
Yeah.
all those words come in. We'll see everyone next.